So this is a pineapple, and this is a Nerf blaster. Unfortunately, this thing isn't quite strong enough. Fortunately, I've made something just a little bit stronger. 3, 2, 1. Are you okay? All right, let's rewind a little bit and I'll tell you how I got to this point. So for the longest time now, I've really wanted to make one of these Nerf blasters from scratch. And although these things fire pretty fast, the one that we're gonna make in this video is gonna be a whole lot faster than this one. How fast do you ask? Well, my goal is to launch one of these tiny yellow foam balls at or above the speed of sound. That sounds fast. Yep, that is really fast. To be precise, that's 1,234 kilometers an hour, or about 767 miles an hour. I have no idea if we'll be able to do that, but if we do, this thing is gonna be awesome. And I want this whole big contraption to actually look like a Nerf blaster. I think that's gonna be so cool. But a quick warning, this is not a toy. Don't attempt this at home. And although it looks like a Nerf blaster, it's basically just a science experiment that looks cool. All right, let's get started. So how are we gonna be able to launch one of these things at over 1,200 kilometers an hour? Well, with air pressure. And for that, I've got this Paintball air tank. Now this thing is normally used to launch hundreds and hundreds of small paintballs out of a paintball gun. The way we're gonna use it is that I don't want this to last for hundreds and hundreds of shots, but I'd rather just fill up this whole thing and then empty it all out at once as fast as possible to launch one of these down a barrel. So in essence, this whole build is pretty simple. Air goes in here. I've got a steel tube into which I can shove one of these balls. It just happens to be a really nice and snug fit. And then to connect the tube to the air tank, I've got just a 1-inch ball valve. So this thing can open and close. So in essence, this whole thing is just these 3 pieces connected together. And to attach all that together and also be able to attach a filling point and a bunch of other bits, I've got a chunk of steel. We're gonna start off by cutting ourselves a chunk of this, putting it in the lathe, doing a bunch of lathe work. We're gonna have to drill a bunch of holes, do a bunch of machining to it. And after all that is done, we can drill a couple of holes for both valves to fill the thing and for a gauge to see how much pressure we have. I'll have to use a couple of really strange sizes dies to make some threads to fit with that paintball tank. Then once all the machining is done, we can weld all of these bits together, so to connect the steel part to the valve, and then with the help of another part that we made on the lathe, connect the valve to the barrel, and then we'll end up with an assembly looking something like this. And as you just saw, I've put some tapped holes in here, one of which is for the pressure gauge, so we can see how much pressure is in the tank, and I've got another one for the fill nipple, so we can actually put some air into here. And if I've done this right, these threads should now match up with the paintball air tank. Doesn't look like much, but in essence, this is a Nerf blaster right now. But this part is only half the story, because in order to be able to launch one of those foam balls at the speed of sound, we're gonna need a little bit more help than just air pressure. We're also gonna need the lack of pressure, or a vacuum. And that's why on the other end of this thing, I built this contraption. So let me tell you what's going on the business end here. So normally, with any type of Nerf blaster or paintball gun or whatever, as soon as you start accelerating the ball, you're gonna encounter air resistance. There's air in the barrel and there's air in the atmosphere, right? And that air is gonna wanna slow down the ball. Now, we don't want that to happen. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna suck all the air out of the entire barrel so that while the ball is traveling all the way from back here until it reaches the tip here, it has no air resistance and can be pushed much faster by the air that comes out here. Now you might wonder what this tank is in the front here, and this is a little trick I picked up from the Backyard Scientist and Smarter Every Day. They both made videos where they launch stuff really fast. I'll link both of those videos down below, they're fantastic. But in essence, what this does is that this is a place where the vacuum can accumulate. So that in case there's a little bit of air left in the tube, as the Nerf gun pushes it through. Before I welded all this together, I've drilled a bunch of holes in the front here so that as the ball is traveling down the barrel, that air has somewhere to go in here, and the ball doesn't have to worry about all that air resistance. At least, in theory, that's how it should work. But this is way too much talking and not enough playing around with this, so just let's try it out. So, ball goes in here. By the way, I've sanded the inside of this barrel to make it extra nice and smooth. Actually, I had to make a special tool for that. So now I can shove this ball all the way down the barrel. And for this first step, I'm just gonna start with air. No vacuum and also not a whole lot of pressure. I just wanna see how all this works. Now to get that ball moving at the speeds that we want to, we're gonna need a ton of pressure. And then we're gonna achieve that is with this thing. This might look like a bicycle pump, but it's actually a paintball air tank pump. And this thing can get a ton of pressure. Only problem is, it requires a ton of effort. So, this thing connects right there. I'll do it on the table so you guys can see how much we pump. I didn't know what to tell me that was gonna be so much work. So we're currently at about 25 bars, about 360 PSI, which is just about a third of the final pressure that I want to shoot this thing at. So I've got a piece of foam board just to have something to shoot at. Let's see how this goes. 3, 2, 1. Look, it's smoking. And we actually made a little bit of a dent in here. So as a first test, that was super fun and pretty useful. I think just increasing the pressure and adding in the vacuum would make this thing a whole lot stronger. But there's one more thing that I want to change in order to be able to shoot as fast as possible. And that is the way this thing is triggered. So I want as much of the air to come out as fast as possible. But the problem I'm having right now is that since I'm manually shoving this ball valve open, that is taking me way too long. So the faster I can do this, the more air will flow out. And the way I'm gonna fix this is that I want to use a spring, a really big and strong spring, to pull this open super quickly with the touch of a trigger. Now to make this spring open this ball valve, we're gonna need a whole bunch more parts. We're gonna have to modify this handle, weld on a bunch of stuff, do a bunch of cutting, grinding, and some more welding. We're also gonna have to do a bunch of CNC machining for some wooden parts. And then to attach all of that together, we're gonna need some 3D printed parts that are gonna bolt on, combining all these parts with some more springs. In the end, what we're gonna be left with, don't tell me that this isn't an awesome Nerf blaster. Starting off at the front, it's sporting some nice stable legs. All of this is 3D printed, and I figured since I wanna make it look like a Nerf blaster, I'm just gonna print a bunch of parts and detail them and style them. And it was actually really fun printing all these parts with all of these different features, just like a regular Nerf blaster would have. So moving from the front a little bit further back, you see that I've got this big spring installed here. And this is what's gonna pull the valve open super fast. And to trigger all that, we've got this trigger mechanism. It consists of 2 pieces of wood. The metal will latch onto the top of this, and when I release the trigger, it's gonna be able to do that. It is quite hard to lock all of this in place, but once it is, everything is pretty securely held in place until I push the trigger, and hopefully that is a big increase in the speed at which we open that valve. Now to finish this thing off, some more printed parts, this time with my logo. And this thing butts up against the shoulder, and we're ready to try this thing out. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I want the front half of this thing to be under a vacuum, and we're gonna achieve that with this vacuum pump. That thing is connected to a hose that will connect onto here. And the way we're gonna seal off the end here, super simple, piece of clear packing tape, and once the ball comes flying out, it will just smash through that little piece of tape right there. Turn on the vacuum pump, and we can see that little gauge go all the way down to about minus 95 kilopascal. And the cool thing is that in theory, I should be able to disconnect this thing, and this will still be sealed tight. That's really cool. I've got one more trick up my sleeve. Doing it this way, it's just gonna take forever. Getting it up to 60, 70 PSI would take half an hour at least. So, got myself some air. This thing is 200 bars. It's a diving tank. and we're gonna use it to fill about 69 bars, which is the maximum that the valve can take, into this thing. All right, now here's my setup for the first shot with absolutely everything installed. We're just gonna go full beans, full pressure, vacuum, and just see what happens. But first, a quick ad from today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators, where you can learn new skills, deepen existing passions, or get lost in creativity. So they've got classes on basically everything you've ever wanted to learn. Either it's woodworking, 3D modeling, or video editing. Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning that there's no ads, and they're always adding new premium content. So you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. Now, one class that I'm really interested in is Thomas Frank's class on productivity for creators. Build a system that brings out your best. I think that's gonna be a really good one. Now, you better be quick because the first 1,000 of my subscribers that click the link in my description below will get 1 month free of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. I've got this speed trap thingy here that is supposed to be able to measure the speed. I've had a bit of varying results with this thing. It says that one of these goes about 27 meters a second, which is about right for how fast these are meant to shoot, but we'll see how well this thing does at a lot higher speeds. Am I worried? A little bit. First test, full beans, 65 bars, vacuum. Let's see what happens. I mean, it definitely works. I am, however, a little bit uncertain about this whole contraption. This thing showed 195 meters per second, which is about 700 some kilometers an hour, which is really, really fast, but I'm not sure if it's accurate because I've tried shooting stuff through this thing at a much lower pressure with no vacuum, and I've gotten a higher number. So which one is right and which one is wrong? Now, I tried filming it in slow-mo on my phone, which is 240 frames a second. Only problem with that is in one frame nothing happens, and in the next frame everything has already happened. So neither my phone or this camera is able to record fast enough. Luckily, I managed to get my hands on this bad boy. This is a Phantom Flex 4K. It's a high-speed camera that is able to shoot 1,000 frames a second in 4K. And the maximum it will do is about 3,000 frames a second. So, let's try this thing out. All right, we are ready for some serious science. We've got the board with the black and white lines so we can measure the speed. We've got everything cleaned up and set up. You might also notice that there's quite a lot of light here. That is because the high-speed camera needs a ton of light. In fact, I've got not 1, 2, but 3 massive lights. The high-speed camera is safely all the way at the other end of my workshop. So my plan is to shoot this thing this direction, passing all these lines, and we'll be able to measure the speed in the high speed afterwards. At the other end here, I've got a bunch of really thick blankets here that are hopefully gonna catch that foam dart. You may also notice that I've covered most of this stuff here in plastic and the table. There is a really good reason for that, and you're gonna want to stick around to see what that is. So let's get right to it. The high-speed camera is set to 4K at 1,000 frames a second. I'll load this thing up with as much pressure as I'm comfortable with. Ball in the barrel, vacuum in the front, and then we'll just shoot and see what happens. Safety on, and fill her up. 1,000 PSI with vacuum in 3, 2, 1. All right, so I just looked at the high speed, and at 1,000 frames a second, this thing is barely visible. So, although 4K is really cool, we're gonna crank it down all the way to the lowest resolution, which means that we're gonna get 3,000 frames a second, so 3 times as fast. We'll do it again, and then see what happens. In 3, 2, 1. If you're wondering why I'm running, I've got 5 seconds from when I pull the trigger to stop the camera, or else it wouldn't be recorded. Wow, this thing is really, really fast. Even at 3,000 frames a second, there's only a handful of frames that have the ball visible in it. So let's talk about what's going on here, because it is a little bit strange. That first shot that you just saw was at 70 bars with the vacuum pressure. In my mind, that should be really, really fast. But when I do the math by counting the amount of these lines that the ball passes in a certain amount of frames, in this case, it passed 13 of these lines in 10 frames. Do the math on that. That is roughly 680 kilometers an hour, which is only about half of the speed that we're aiming for. So what's going on? Now, I've done this test again and again and again and again, and it always ended up being about the same. I've even once increased the pressure all the way to 80 bars, which is over 1100 PSI, and it still didn't go any faster. But then I noticed that right before the ball comes out, there seemed to be a little bulge in the tape, sort of indicating that there's some air in front of the ball. So either the vacuum system isn't good enough, or some air manages to escape around the ball and builds up some pressure, slowing the ball down before it comes out of the nozzle. Now here's where it gets interesting, because I tried the same thing again, everything the same, but without the vacuum, and all of a sudden, this thing shot faster, which, I don't know. Even weirder is that once I went down from 70 bars to 50 bars, it shot even faster. At the 50 bar pressure with no vacuum, it shot about 950 kilometers an hour, which is starting to get somewhere. I mean, it's not Mach 1 yet, but it's getting close. Now, the fact that the ball went faster when I decreased the pressure led me into a rabbit hole. So I tried shooting at lower and lower and lower and lower PSI, both with and without pressure. Now, here's the interesting bit. Once I got down to 35 bars, the ball stopped being any faster. Now, with that pressure, the ball passed 19 of these lines, which, if you do the math on, is actually over 1,000 kilometers an hour. Still not Mach 1, but it's actually like 0.8 Mach, which is so close. Now, I went in 5 bar increments, and the interesting bit is that from 35 to 30 to 25, the speed was basically the same, with just lower pressures. And I tried all of these pressures, both with and without vacuum, and they're consistently faster without the vacuum, which is kind of annoying because I spent all this time on it. And the speeds with the vacuum are also consistent, around 700 kilometers an hour, which is considerably slower. I've tested this and I've tested this, and I can't figure out why it won't shoot faster with the vacuum in front. So for now, the top speed of this thing is 1,000 kilometers an hour, which isn't the Mach 1 that I was hoping for. It's so close, but it's still really, really cool. As for how to make it shoot faster, I don't really know. Could be so many different things that I need to change. Luckily, you guys are smart, so maybe one of you guys has an idea on how I can improve this thing. Is the valve too slow? Is the coupling between the tank and the valve too small? Is the barrel too short? Does the ball have too tight or too loose of a fit? Maybe the holes that are drilled in the front to connect the vacuum tank aren't big enough? I don't really know at this point, but I'll continue working on it, and hopefully in the future I'll make a version 2 that is actually supersonic. But we can't end things here. Although it's been fun shooting at a blanket, which, by the way, I've shot out so many times and with so much force that I've actually managed to punch a hole through all 8 layers of these blankets, which makes it really, really tempting to shoot at something a bit more fun than a blanket. And yes, if you haven't guessed it by now, that's also why I've covered my entire workshop in plastic. Let's see what happens to these once they get hit with a foam ball at 1,000 kilometers an hour. All right, this is 1,000 kilometers an hour Nerf Ball versus watermelon. In 3, 2, 1. There's watermelon everywhere! I've taped off a lot, but I didn't anticipate it splatting that much upwards. I've now got watermelon stuff all over my ceiling. Let's tape it off some more and do it again. In 3, 2, 1. I'm absolutely covered in watermelon. That is a pineapple. 3, 2, 1. I wonder if it's strong enough to shoot a hole in a coconut. Only one way to find out. It wasn't quite strong enough, but it did make a crack in it. And why not finish up this fruit salad with a nice, refreshing energy drink? Well, guys, you know what? Oh God. Thank you so much for watching. I had a ton of fun with this build and making this video. I hope you had fun watching. Let me know if you want me to make a version 2 that actually shoots faster than the speed assigned, and maybe even we'll be able to crack a coconut. As for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. I'm gonna spend the next week scraping fruit salad and Red Bull off everything in here. Bye-bye. But first, I'm gonna have a little bit of